Save the Semantics episode 364. It is February 6th, 2026. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. Recording this on a Friday afternoon / evening. This is the day after the NBA trade deadline, which was yesterday around noon Pacific time. A lot of stuff went down. I don't think I've really... Well, the last time I recorded was a little while ago. I posted it yesterday, which just felt... I had forgotten to post it because I've had a lot of things going on. So by the time last episode came out, it was probably too late. It's a very dated discussion. But anyways, I did want to talk about the trade deadline because it was pretty eventful. A lot of trades went down, a lot of pieces moved around, and I think now that we're sort of on this kind of back end of the season going into the All-Star break, there is kind of this almost sense of maybe almost rejuvenation. I think once All-Star break sort of passes and there's this kind of like week-long break for the season, I think that's going to give a lot of time for players to rest, for there to just kind of be this sort of quieter period. I think that's going to be much needed, just in general. I mean, I'll be very I'll be very happy for there to be just this kind of little break. I also haven't really been watching the NBA super extensively or super really just been really paying too much attention to it. So honestly, I think just having that little period and then getting back into the kind of the season a little bit more after the All-Star break, I think will be good. Because I do feel, honestly, that I think following this trade deadline, especially kind of with the moves the Warriors did, I do feel this almost sense of acceptance, you know what I mean? Of what this team is at this current point in time. I'll get into a little bit more of that. But yeah, let's just start off with the Warriors. So the Warriors finally trade Jonathan Kuminga along with Buddy Hield to the Atlanta Hawks for Kristaps Porzingis. This one kind of came out of nowhere. This was sort of a out of left field trade. I think once there were news and there were, discussions about how the Bucks were just kind of backing out of any deals at this point, which is not all that surprising. This is just going to be a kind of an ongoing thing for the Bucks until Giannis finally gets traded. I think at this point, it's just not worthwhile to even really discuss. I think everybody is just tired of it. So when the trade happens, it happens, and that's it. Or he just never gets traded, and he plays for a mediocre Bucks team. Who knows? Maybe that'll just end up being the case, and he retires with his team. But yeah, so with the Warriors trade, finally kind of wash yourself of the Kuminga stink, the whole situation there. I think if this is the best, and I think there were other offers available out there, but in terms of maybe timing, in terms of the fact that maybe there just wasn't that same type of availability for certain players, I think that maybe this is just the move that they can make right now, is going for Porzingis, who has not been healthy this season. Both his sort of health and also his injury history is not great. It really feels that he is kind of turning a corner to maybe the end of his career. So the idea of him joining this team as the best version of himself, I think, would result in the Warriors being once again an exciting team. But I think that this sort of feels, I don't know, maybe this just kind of feels like a long shot, like just something that, just doing something, right? I think especially getting rid of Kuminga, I think was probably honestly a bigger thing, in my opinion. This season is a wash. And I think that I've come to terms with it after the Jimmy injury, but now that we're sort of a little bit removed from that point, I think I'm also willing to kind of accept that the path forward for this team is just kind of letting everybody else play, outside of Steph, Porzingis, and obviously Jimmy Butler, and recoup some sort of assets. They're not going to get a high draft pick because of their position right now, but get some kind of assets so that they can recoup something maybe in the summer, right? Maybe they can readjust. I don't know what it looks like for them in the summer, but, just kind of go into next season with a certain level of health. I don't know what it's going to look like for Jimmy following an ACL tear. I mean, that's going to take a whole year plus for him to recover. So obviously you're probably not going to be expecting him for most of the regular season. But if there is any way, shape, or form for him to get back, he's not going to be the same at his age. But if he's able to contribute in some way going into going into a hypothetical postseason, that could be something, right? And then that could be sort of the goal there. It's a very, it's a very kind of flowery vision for sure. That's kind of just like the hope that I'm riding on, because again, this season is a wash. The most that they can probably do is just compete for a play-in position and see what they can kind of do there. But I was thinking it might be even better for them to just try to tank. But considering the opposition that they're going up against in this tanking race, where basically a third of the league is now going to be tanking, I think it just might not be worth it. It just might not be worth it to try to like throw games intentionally. They might just lose, you know what I mean? They just might lose, and maybe that would just kind of work out in their favor. But I think it's not worthwhile to try to chase this bottom, chasing the bottom of the league, because there's going to be a lot of really bad teams right now. I tuned in last night to maybe the last few minutes of the Pistons and the Wizards game. I was just curious because I saw that the Wizards were up by about 10 or so, and I was just curious. I was like, how is this happening? And it turned out it's one of those kind of fluky post-trade deadline kind of malaise games, right? Where you have this sort of bench mob, the G League team of the Wizards just going crazy. It was fun to watch. I mean, that was really fun to watch, but you're going to just get these like crazy moments, you know what I mean? But the Wizards are going to be, they are intentionally sitting down their starters and intentionally sitting down Trae Young, and they'll be sitting out Anthony Davis, absolutely. So they'll be, they are trying to lose, and they somehow won last night. While, kind of with the Warriors case, last night, I also didn't catch most of the game, but they were able to pull off a comeback against the Suns with Pat Spencer and Guy Santos leading the way. That just might be kind of what it looks like for the rest of the season, and I'm accepting of that. It's not going to be great basketball, but you might have some fun moments like you did last night. Just getting kind of these unexpected wins against teams that are maybe just not as like focused. I think a lot of teams and players are just kind of wanting for there to be this break going into the All-Star break. So I think that that's going to be, that there's going to be kind of these like funky moments where teams just somehow pull off these kind of miraculous wins at times, and maybe the Warriors can take advantage of that and somehow climb up in the standings. I don't know. I'm just thinking of hypotheticals here, but I really think that the real thing is just to sort of accept where they are, and that is just not a team that is really going to do too much. If there is kind of this surprise here and there, that would be great. But outside of that, just enjoy it for what it is. I mean, Steph is currently out right now too. So I think that you just kind of have to allow these other bench players to do something and see what they can produce. I think the vision is really going to be for next year, though, for this team, is just sort of recuperate, recover, do what you can, see if you can maybe get some additional pieces, see if you can get some players from the buyout market, some vet minimums or whatever. I don't know. Just do something, right? I know a lot of it hinges on Porzingis' health, but to be honest, a lot of it hinges on just the health of Steph and just the older team members. So I guess that's just, I don't know. That's just kind of what it is. And I think that I just don't want to go into next season hoping for too much, but there is a little bit of that I think I can kind of tap into if I need to, you know what I mean? It's like, it would be fun to kind of see a potential Steph, a healthy Steph and Kristaps, pairing and seeing how that goes. But you're kind of riding on that hope, and maybe somehow his health improves and maybe he is able to maintain, just not get into any injuries or anything, or just is able to stay healthy overall. That would be great, but we'll see how that goes. I think it was the same thing when the Hawks traded for Porzingis. It's just like, ooh, this is like one of the better moves in the off season. I thought so, and then I kind of I bought into that, and that kind of bit me in the ass, right? Anytime you have any hope for the Hawks, although right now I would say they probably look the future for them, it looks a lot brighter. Even though they traded Porzingis and Trae Young and everything, they're sort of like in this kind of rebuild sort of stage, but they're going to get a top draft pick because of New Orleans. So they're in a really good spot. I think they're in a great spot. I think with the Kuminga piece for them, that's sort of just kind of taking a flyer on a young prospect, just kind of seeing what the potential upside for him would be. I have no idea what the fit is going to be with him alongside, Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson's going to be the one kind of, he is their sort of primary ball handler in a lot of instances, just watching him play. Their number one option and everything. So if Kuminga can kind of be like a slasher, sort of, a tertiary scorer, secondary scorer, whatever, that might be interesting. But I just don't. I don't know what the vision for that looks like, but it might be interesting. So I'll be keeping an eye on that and seeing what the fit looks like for that team, because it might be interesting. Because I feel Kuminga would maybe slot to the 4, right? I'm assuming, because you have Johnson sort of playing maybe the 2-3 position. I mean, he's ball handler, but position wise he would be like a 3 or 4, right? I forgot what exactly position he is right now, but if he's like a 3, then maybe Kuminga is a 4, and then you got Nickeil Alexander-Walker as starting guard alongside Dyson Daniels, and then whoever is at center, Onyeka Okongwu. I don't know. That might just be what the team looks like next year. We'll see. Anyways, let's talk about some other trades. I mentioned this earlier, Davis going to the Wizards. I think this is a great move for the Wizards, just considering the assets that they didn't really give up. I mean, they gave up nothing in the same way that they gave up nothing for Trae Young. Kind of buying extremely low on both Davis and Young, I think is why not? Why not? Try that out, right? I think there is kind of that blueprint that they're almost following. The earliest example that I can think of in the last few years is when teams that have been tanking buy into and overpay these veteran players. I'm thinking the Rockets as kind of that blueprint almost, overpaying, paying quite a bit for Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks. And I think that helped establish a type of winning, culture for the Rockets. And now they're, one of the better teams in the league. So I think looking at that sort of example, a lot of other teams, it feels, are, buying these sort of veteran players at, maybe not their highest value, right? I think this Davis and Trae Young, these Trae Young, trades, I think have sort of established a potential for the franchise moving forward. You can only do so much losing, right? I think at a certain point, while your players may have developed or are sort of continuing to develop, you do need to have a type of presence that allows them to develop a winning culture as well. And I think that having pieces like Trae Young and Anthony Davis, even though he might be, barring any of his health, I think having them just sort of be there, I think will be really good for this incredibly young nucleus of players. I think they have some exciting pieces. I like Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George. Koulibaly's kind of a mixed bag, but defensively he seems to be kind of a beast on that end. Maybe above Carrington, Trey Johnson. I liked kind of, I've heard and liked some of the things that I've been seeing about this kind of Will Riley dude off the bench. They have some nice young pieces there, and I think that if they can kind of complement them and sort of help, elevate some of that, kind of that youth and some of the, mistakes that come with that could propel them into potential, maybe kind of lower end playoff positioning, especially in the Eastern Conference, right? I mean, I don't know who else are they going to be really going up against? You're seeing the Hornets kind of rise, so they'll probably be up there in terms of kind of a younger team. The Pacers are going to be back, but everybody else, there's a lot of kind of, there's a lot of question marks. The Cavs, who knows what they look like next year? Like we'll talk about them. I'll talk about them after. The Bulls I'll get to the Bulls too. Celtics are probably going to be good with Tatum coming back. But there's a lot of question marks on these teams, and I think they can kind of take advantage of, maybe some of that dysfunction or just lack of cohesion with a lot of those teams, and maybe jump into play-in, playoff positioning. And I think that will be, that'll be a huge win for this franchise in particular, who has not had a winning season in something like 8 years or something like that, right? And I think the fans are wanting to see competitive basketball again. I think that regardless of what their pick is going to be this year, whether it is like, top 3 or whatever, I think that the move is going to be to kind of work with what they have and see what they can get. See how much they can progress going into next season. So I really like that move for them. I think it's good to try and put the young team in winning situations and in competitive basketball games, similar to kind of how the Rockets did. And I think that's going to be good. I think that's going to be really exciting for Wizards fans, you know what I mean? Who knows? They still might be like mediocre to bad, right? But at least there is like a potential vision moving forward in terms of, having some veteran players to complement their younger team and actually, help push them to and develop a sort of winning culture. And I think that's huge. So I really like that move for the Wizards. Another team that also did a similar kind of move in terms of getting a distressed asset, if you want to call it that. Although I think with the Jaren Jackson trade, I think the Jazz were able to get, quite a bit, and they were able to move off, or rather they did trade quite a bit with like first round picks. I know the first round picks are not like the most crazy thing, but they still the first round picks to Memphis. I think the idea for Memphis next year will also be for them to try and compete. They have some intriguing talent with a Keontae George and, maybe Ace Bailey, Walker Kessler. I know he's not super young, but he's still on the younger side. So I think that kind of adding a Jaren Jackson along with, I guess, keeping a Lauri Markkanen, I think that's going to be just this massive team. I think they're going to be a tough out. I think that might be a pretty tough team. I don't know if they're going to be great, but they might be good. They might be pretty tough to go up against, especially just kind of all that size that they have on their front court. And I think that's going to be, that's a very interesting team to keep an eye on. But I think there is just kind of that vision of getting players and not trying to kind of build primarily through the draft. I think that you get your sort of main, or you get one of your main pieces in the draft, of course, but you build around them with actual competent players, right? Another team, Detroit. Detroit had a lot of young players. They had one of the worst losing streaks of all time 2 seasons ago. And then, last season they made their run. But that kind of came about with getting some competent veteran players in a Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias Harris, and then, having them kind of complement their main core of, Cade, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, right? Like that kind of was sort of the vision in a similar way to what the Rockets did. And I think that's kind of what a lot of teams are sort of following. I'm sure there are other instances of this in in the past. I'm sure it's not like the only example of that, or, the Rockets they were not the primary and the initial team to do something like this, but I would say within the modern era, within the last few years or so, that is kind of the reference point that I can point to and say that kind of was, that was sort of a blueprint that worked for a team. And it has worked for other teams as well, including Detroit. So maybe these other teams that have not been good, including a Washington or a Utah, can kind of look to that and then try to sort of build from that point on. So I think that's kind of what a lot of these teams are doing, that have been in tanking positions and are now maybe looking to actually win next season. So I think that's very interesting. Anyways, kind of moving to sort of some of the other trades that have happened. James Harden to the Cavs. That one was kind of out of nowhere, right? I don't really have too much more to add in terms of conversation. I think it's just, it's something that was pretty out of left field, but sort of unsurprising considering Harden's history in terms of wanting to go for the best potential contract in his position in the last year of his contract, right? So it's all about money for him. Like that's just kind of what it comes down to. I think this works out for the Cavs pretty well, considering Garland's injury history, and it just his availability was a huge issue for them. And has been a huge issue for them. Last season they struggled in the second round because of the fact that, Garland was just not available and not playing to the best of his abilities. So that was something that I think the Cavs were looking at. They were looking at the rest of their team. There were a lot of expectations for them to kind of be one of the better teams in the East, and that has not really worked out for them. They have started to get back up, and they've been climbing the standings. But I think coming out of the gate, they were one of the more disappointing teams of this season, and I think that put a lot of pressure on ownership or management to do something. I think that with having these kind of higher caliber players, they also were very expensive as well. There is just this expectation. It's like, hey, at least make it to like the Eastern Conference Finals, right? Like that's kind of the goal with this roster. They were a 60+ win team last year. They faltered, and they were obviously beat by that Indiana team, but I think there was just not, I think that there is still a lot of that expectation going into this season and going into the playoffs that they were going to be one of the better teams in this weak East. And they should have taken advantage of that, but obviously it hasn't worked out. So yeah, I think that this trade in the short term will put them, that's kind of the goal, right? Is to try to win in the short term, win this year if they can. I don't know what it's going to look like for them next year, but this year is kind of the real push, and just kind of see how far it goes for them, adding Harden to the mix. All right, other trades. The Wolves getting Ayo Dosumu is probably one of my favorite trades for them. I think that's just a perfect fit for that team in particular. The team needed to have an additional ball handler, and while Ayo is not, he's not a point guard, but he can be kind of a potential lead guard for them when Ant is maybe sitting. He pairs very well with him, having him just kind of, slot alongside a DiVincenzo, having him come off the bench. Like, I think he's a very versatile player. I've always liked him playing. I've always liked watching him play. I think this year in particular, he's had some really standout moments. There was a period of time in which he was considered one of the best fourth quarter players. But I think, kind of earlier on in the season when the Bulls had their little, they were like 5-0, and that was obviously just kind of like this false hope start. But I think with the Wolves in particular, it looks great. I think he's gonna look really great alongside Ant. He's also a great two-way player as well. So it's just like a perfect fit for them, and I think that is a great pickup for the Wolves. I think it's hilarious that they traded Mike Conley in this trade, and then he was kind of traded around, and then he and then he was like able to come back to Minnesota. It's so funny how that works sometimes. So he never left, basically. He got traded. I'm just curious if he ever actually left, or if what that kind of situation looks like for NBA players when, I don't know. That is kind of a unique case, but good on the Wolves. Some other trades, I guess. The Zubats trade is fascinating. Hearing about the pick protections for the Indiana pick that they traded to the Clippers is fascinating. The fact that it's like 1 through 5 protected, and then 5 through 9 it could fall to the Clippers. Like, it's such a weird. I haven't seen anything like that before, but maybe I haven't been paying too much attention. But just the fact that, usually a lot of the cases it's like a 1 through 10 protected. It's like lottery protected pick, but not half lottery protected and half, unprotected. Like, it's such a weird. it's a very weird kind of. It's a weird stipulations. It's almost like you're gambling with a pick. But I guess you're also gambling with lottery odds too. So I don't know. Maybe it's just sort of, you're putting this like parlay on top of one or the other. I don't know. Anyways, that's probably the most fascinating piece. I think Zubats will probably fit very well with the Pacers. I don't know if he necessarily, is going to play in that same style in terms of the kind of the run and gun style. There's going to be some shifts in terms of their play style going into next year. He's not Miles Turner. He's not someone who, extends and, stretches the court. But I think that, he's going to be a good, I feel like he's going to be a good fit. He's just a very good, solid center. And I think that that's going to work out very well, for Indiana. There were so many trades. I'm not even going to get into the minor ones, but there were a lot of trades, a lot of moves being made. I think that I I think that overall it seemed like a pretty good trade deadline in terms of just the overall entertainment value. I mean, there were some shockers with James Harden, Jaren Jackson, Anthony Davis, kind of, the Porzingis, Porzingis deal. What else? There were some fun ones in there. I think it's not going to hit the same as Luka getting traded or anything like that, right? But this was pretty solid. This was like a solid trade deadline overall, and got some entertaining moments out of it. Obviously, the Warriors situation is not any better, really, but I don't know. What can you really do? I think I know, I think I'm curious to hear if there was any push to try to get some of those other centers that maybe were available in terms of a Jaren Jackson or a Zubats, but I think maybe the packages that the Warriors were kind of competing against were too high. I mean, especially the Indiana one, I think. So I think that they just weren't able to, they also, the Warriors have Kuminga, but do the Clippers want to take him on? I don't know. In terms of like a blue chip prospect, I don't think they really had that. The Indiana at least had Benedict Mathurin, who has been playing well, and there is some upside to him. He has like a proven record. I mean, he made it to the finals with Indiana last year. So I think that that is sort of like the upside that the Clippers are potentially gaining. And I think that it will be I think that the Warriors just were not able to, I don't know, maybe there were other centers out there, but maybe they were just kind of working with what they had. And the vision, I feel, and I don't know if they really confirmed this, but I feel that the vision is for next year. I think this year is just rest up all your players, rest up especially the older players, and just kind of whatever, do what you can. You're not going to tank because you're not going to get like a top pick, but just play the other players and see kind of where that gets you. So I don't know. I think that's that. I'm sure there were plenty of trades, but I think those are the ones that I wanted to highlight. And I think I feel a lot more, I just think that the Warriors in particular, I'm just not expecting a lot. And I think letting go of some of those expectations, especially for this season, will allow me to actually enjoy the game, and instead of, the outcome of the season, enjoy these individual games and enjoy whatever comes out of it, and not be super clouded by what you expected going into the season. Don't be, there's no point in looking back and being like, what could have been and stuff like that. I think it's fine to do that once in a while, but at a certain point you have to you might be missing out on some good basketball, right? Maybe it's not the high caliber talent and the best team that, that was, the expectation sort of placed on this roster, but maybe you might be missing out on some decent basketball regardless. There's going to be some weird things going on with a third of the league tanking. So it's going to be funky going into the remainder of this last part of the season. But I think that there might be still some interesting basketball to be had. And then once you get to the postseason, it's going to be a whole nother conversation. So we'll get there when we get there. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for listening as always. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.